Echoes of the wild heart. The acrid tang of ozone and burnt metal hung heavy in the air of the scrapyard, a symphony of decay conducted by the relentless sun beating down on Fearsome. Dan coughed, pulling his threadbare scarf higher over his nose as he navigated the labyrinth of wrecked hovercrafts and discarded mining drones. He was looking for a specific kind of thermal regulator, the kind that handled extreme heat and wouldn't bankrupt him, the kind that might just keep his jury-rigged cooling system limping through another sweltering Fearsome summer. He rounded a mountain of twisted alloys, the metallic scent intensifying, and stopped dead. Not more than 20 feet away, nestled in the skeletal remains of a transport freighter, was a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was small, barely bigger than a large dog, but its proportions were all wrong. A powerful, thick neck led to a massive head, hinting at a skull built for ramming. Its front legs were thick and sturdy, ending in paws tipped with wickedly sharp claws, while the rear legs were lean and muscular, suggesting explosive speed. Its hide was a patchwork of mottled browns and blacks, almost like camouflage gone wrong. But what truly captured Dan's attention was the creature's labored breathing and the crimson stain blooming on its flank. Fear warred with a potent surge of protectiveness within him. This was no native creature of Fearsome, a planet known for its hardy, scavenging rodents and surprisingly aggressive sand skimmers. This was something engineered. Something dangerous. Something hurt. He moved cautiously, his wrench held loosely in his hand, more as a shield than a weapon. "Hey, little one," he croaked, his voice raspy from the dust. "Are you all right?" The creature barely reacted, its chest rising and falling shallowly. Dan could see the rise and fall of its ribs through its matted fur. It was close to death. Ignoring the instinct screaming at him to back away, Dan approached. He could see now the telltale signs of Novatech breeding, the almost too perfect musculature, the unnaturally sharp claws, the vague impression of power that radiated from the creature even in its weakened state. This was a Nova's war beast cub, most likely dumped after failing to meet some arbitrary standard. Disgust swelled within him. Nova's corporation was notorious for its unethical practices, churning out genetically modified creatures for war and entertainment, treating them like disposable commodities. To think that they would just abandon this creature. He dropped his wrench. Whatever the risk, he couldn't leave it here to die. He knelt, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm not going to hurt you," he murmured, extending a hand, palm open. He knew it was a gamble. War beasts were bred for aggression, for obedience to commands, not for trust. But he had to try. The cub flinched, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Its eyes, a startling amber flecked with green, fixed on him with suspicion. Dan held his breath, willing it not to attack. Then, slowly, haltingly, the cub lowered its head and nudged his hand with its snout. It was a tentative touch, almost fragile, but it was enough. Dan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had a chance. He gently ran his hand over the cub's matted fur, feeling the heat radiating from its wound. It flinched again, but didn't pull away. "All right," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He carefully lifted the cub, surprised by its weight. It whined softly, nuzzling against his chest. Dan cradled it close, shielding it from the harsh sunlight, and began the long trek back to his workshop. Back in his workshop, a cramped space cobbled together from salvaged metal and powered by a temperamental generator, Dan set about tending to the cub's wound. The gash on its flank was deep, likely caused by shrapnel or a laser blast. He cleaned it as best he could with the limited supplies he had, wincing at the cub's whimpers. He stitched the wound with fishing line and a sterilized needle, feeling a surge of adrenaline as he worked. He wasn't a medic, but he knew enough to stop the bleeding and prevent infection. He hoped. Once the wound was bandaged, he offered the cub a bowl of water and some scraps of synth meat. It lapped at the water greedily, but eyed the food with suspicion. "It's all right," Dan reassured it. "It's not great, but it'll give you some energy." After a few hesitant sniffs, the cub devoured the synth meat. Dan watched it, a flicker of hope igniting within him. It was going to live. The next few days were a blur of tending to the cub, monitoring its health, and trying to figure out what to do with it. He knew he couldn't keep it hidden forever. Fearsome wasn't exactly known for its tolerance of exotic creatures, especially those bred by novas. He named the cub Echo. It seemed fitting, somehow. It wasn't just a creature of instinct, despite its breeding. It was an echo of something wild, something untamed, something that deserved to be free. As Echo recovered, Dan began to see glimpses of the creature it was meant to be. It possessed incredible strength, tearing apart discarded engine blocks with ease. Its reflexes were lightning fast, snatching flies out of the air with a snap of its jaws. But alongside the raw power, there was something else, a playful curiosity, a surprising gentleness. Echo would follow Dan around the workshop, observing his work with rapt attention. It would nudge his hand with its head, demanding attention, and purr, a low rumble that vibrated through Dan's chest, when he scratched behind its ears. Dan found himself growing attached to the creature. He knew it was foolish, that Echo was a product of ruthless genetic engineering, a potential weapon. But he couldn't help but see past the programming, to the animal beneath, to the wild heart that beat within its chest. He started training Echo, not to fight, but to control its instincts. He taught it simple commands: sit, stay, easy. It was slow going, but Echo was surprisingly intelligent. It quickly learned to associate the commands with rewards, a scratch behind the ears, a piece of synth meat. He also started taking Echo out into the desert, away from the prying eyes of the settlement. He let it run, letting it unleash its pent-up energy. He watched it chase sand skimmers, its powerful body a blur of motion. These moments, watching Echo run free, were the most rewarding. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of connection to the wildness that Echo embodied. But the peace couldn't last forever. Dan knew that he had to find a way to provide for Echo, to give it a life beyond the confines of his workshop. And that meant confronting the very thing he loathed, the arena. The fighting pits of Fearsome were a brutal spectacle, a source of entertainment for the desperate and the depraved. War beasts, cybernetically enhanced gladiators, and desperate humans fought for scraps of glory and a handful of credits. It was a vicious cycle of violence, fueled by the desperation of a dying planet. Dan had sworn he would never participate in such a barbaric practice. But he was running out of options. His savings were dwindling, his generator was on its last legs, and Echo needed more than scraps of synth meat to thrive. He told himself it was a necessary evil, a means to an end. He would use Echo's strength to earn enough credits to buy a better generator, to secure a more stable food supply, to maybe even find a way to escape Fearsome altogether. He registered Echo under a pseudonym, Wildfire, to avoid attracting unwanted attention. He trained Echo relentlessly, honing its natural abilities, teaching it how to defend itself. He made sure to emphasize defense, minimizing the aggression. He wanted Echo to survive, but he didn't want to turn it into a mindless killing machine. The first fight was a nightmare. The arena was a cacophony of roars, cheers, and the sickening crunch of bone. Dan stood in the corner, his heart pounding in his chest, watching Echo face off against a heavily augmented pit bull. Echo was hesitant at first, unsure of what to do. The pit bull charged, snarling, its cybernetic jaws snapping. Echo dodged, its reflexes saving it from a potentially fatal blow. Dan yelled instructions, urging Echo to defend itself. Echo responded, unleashing a flurry of blows that sent the pit bull reeling. It didn't kill it, but it incapacitated it. The crowd roared, demanding more blood. Dan signaled to the referee to stop the fight. He couldn't bear to watch Echo inflict any more damage. He won the fight, but he felt like he had lost something in the process. He had exposed Echo to the brutality of the arena, forced it to tap into its inherent aggression. He felt like he had betrayed its trust. And yet, he needed the money. He fought Echo again, and again. Each time, he felt a little bit of himself die inside. He saw the change in Echo, the growing confidence, the increasing willingness to fight. The wild heart was becoming tainted by the violence of the arena. The credits piled up, but the weight on his conscience grew heavier. He bought a new generator, stocked up on supplies, even started saving for a ticket off Faro Prime. But the victories tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew he couldn't keep going like this. He was sacrificing Echo's well-being for his own comfort, turning it into the very weapon it was bred to be. One night, after a particularly brutal fight, Dan sat with Echo in the workshop. Echo was licking its wounds, its eyes distant. Dan knelt beside it, stroking its fur. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I've done to you." Echo nudged him with its head, its amber eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Dan realized that he couldn't keep Echo in the arena any longer. He had to find a way to break free, to give Echo the life it deserved. He started making plans. He used his credits to buy a dilapidated transport ship, one that had seen better days but was still capable of flight. He spent weeks repairing it, salvaging parts from the junkyard, working late into the night. He knew the risks. Leaving Faro Prime without proper authorization was a crime, one punishable by imprisonment or worse. But he was willing to risk it all for Echo. Finally, the ship was ready. Dan packed his meager belongings, loaded Echo onto the ship, and prepared for departure. He left a note for his neighbor, an old junker named Maggie who had always been kind to him. He explained his situation, told her not to worry, and thanked her for her friendship. He fired up the engine, the ship shuddering violently. He took a deep breath and lifted off, leaving the dusty landscape of Faro Prime behind. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he was heading in the right direction. He was escaping the clutches of the arena, leaving behind the violence and the exploitation. He was searching for a new home, a place where Echo could be free, a place where its wild heart could finally echo with joy. The journey was long and arduous. The ship was unreliable, the navigation system was faulty, and they faced numerous dangers along the way, pirate attacks, asteroid fields, and the constant threat of running out of fuel. But Dan persevered. He was driven by his love for Echo, by his determination to give it a better life. He eventually stumbled upon a remote planet, a lush, verdant world teeming with life. It was uncharted territory, far from the reach of Nova's corporation and the Galactic Authority. He landed the ship in a secluded valley, hidden by towering mountains and dense forests. He stepped out, breathing in the fresh, clean air. Echo followed him, its eyes wide with wonder. It bounded through the tall grass, its tail wagging excitedly. Dan watched it, a smile spreading across his face. This was it. This was the place where Echo could finally be free. He built a small cabin, using salvaged materials from the ship. He learned to hunt and forage, living off the land. He and Echo explored the planet together, discovering hidden waterfalls, ancient ruins, and strange, wonderful creatures. Echo thrived in the wild. It hunted with skill and precision, its instincts honed by generations of genetic engineering. But it never killed unnecessarily. It only took what it needed, and it always treated its prey with respect. Dan and Echo lived in peace for many years. They were a family, bound together by love and loyalty. Echo's wild heart echoed with the quiet joy of a found family, a testament to the power of nurture over nature. One day, Dan knew his time was coming to an end. He laid in his bunk, weak and frail. Echo lay by his side, nuzzling him gently. He looked into Echo's amber eyes, seeing the reflection of his own soul. He knew he was leaving it in good hands, in its own paws, wild and free. He whispered his final words, "Be free, my friend. Be free." And with that, he closed his eyes and passed away, knowing that he had done everything he could to protect the wild heart of the creature he loved. Echo stayed by Dan's side for 3 days, mourning its lost companion. Then, with a final goodbye, it ventured off into the wilderness, carrying the memory of Dan in its heart. It lived a long and full life, roaming the forests and mountains, a symbol of freedom and resilience. Its wild heart continued to echo through the generations, a legacy of love and understanding in a galaxy filled with violence and despair. And sometimes, on a quiet night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of its wild heart, a reminder that even the most savage creatures can be tamed by kindness, and that even in the darkest of times, love can always find a way to bloom.